Organizational Health Solutions, and it's really good to be with you today. Thanks for tuning in. Today's session, as always, is pretty short. It's high impact, and we're really excited to be sharing and speaking into the topic of conflict in the workplace. If you do have any questions, you can just post them in the chat, or if you've got troubles with your video or audio or whatever it may be, Vessel is here with me. Vessel's our business manager, and so he'll kind of attend to any of your needs. But maybe just to start by saying, who are we? Organizational Health Solutions. We are a company dedicated to improving employees' experience in terms of their work. And one of the outcomes and one of the primary outcomes of that is performance. And so we believe that your experience of your job, how you feel about your work, how you feel about your leaders, how you feel about your team determines very much your productivity and your engagement in your work. It's common knowledge, you could say, that when you love your work, you're likely going to perform the most or the best. So that's a little bit about Organizational Health Solutions. I've introduced myself as Caleb. I've been working with teams and leaders for about 7 years, and my team is Georgia with us today, and also Vessel, who is sitting here next to me. Got a wider team of associates. So if you do have trouble, as I mentioned, you can, I think someone's off mute, Vess, so you might want to just check that. But if you do have trouble, just post that in the group. And as I mentioned, today is really about conflict. So I'm going to dive straight in. I feel like I've done a little bit of small talk. So if you've just arrived, welcome. But really today's session is about conflict, and is it a vice or is it a virtue? Is it good or is it bad? Is it productive or is it unproductive? How should we view conflict? And before we start, I actually want to do a bit of a poll, a bit of a census with us. So I'm going to screen share a QR code with you. So you should see it on your screen. So I'm going to ask you to be a little bit adventurous. And could you take your phone out wherever you are and just take your phone out and scan that code with your phone. So with your camera, and you'll see it will automatically ask you to go to a link. And that is a link to the poll. There's also the link in the chat. So I'll give you a minute just to figure that out. So if you go to the chat, you can either click that link, it will open up a new tab, or you can scan your phone, scan this QR code with your phone. And we're going to do a quick poll. I just want to get an idea of kind of who's in the room and how each of you view and experience conflict. And so this is really just to start to get you to think about conflict in a practical way. And so as soon as we're ready and everyone's there, we are going to start. You want to go for it? Okay, so the first question, the code is in the link. Generally, do you think conflict is productive, generally speaking? Okay, great. 50-50. You can see the answers coming in there. We'll give it another 5 seconds just in case you haven't got there yet. If you use that link. Okay. Brilliant. So do you think conflict is productive? Half of you say yes, half of you say no. Very interesting. Okay, next question. Do you fear conflict in your workplace? So this is a personal question, just obviously so you know, the answers are completely anonymous, so no one's going to see this. This is about your personal experience of work and fear. Okay, so it's 2-1. 2 of you say yes, you fear conflict, and 1 of you are saying, well, the ratio is 2-1, and 33% of you are saying no, actually conflict's not as bad as it sounds. Okay, next question. How do you process conflict? So we've given you 2 options: impersonal, very clinical, or personal and emotional. This is a bit of a more difficult question. Okay, very interesting. The results are stabilizing as each of you choose your answer there. Okay, so that's also obviously links very closely with the question around fear, but the majority of us process conflict emotionally and personally. And I think is there one more question? Yeah, one more question. Is there someone in your office or team that creates conflict? Oh, wow. Interesting. Okay. So it's quite clear just from what I'm seeing here that conflict isn't necessarily a happy space for the majority of us here today. And in addition to that, actually, we all have someone, or the majority of us have someone in our office that either creates or stirs conflict. At the end of the session today, I'm going to do another poll based on some of our input. But I hope that gives you a bit of a snapshot into your kind of experience of conflict. But more than that, I think the general experience of conflict in the workplace. Let me go back to my PowerPoint for us today. So we've done that poll, and really what I want to kind of start with is describing a reality that many of us pretty much know all too well. And that reality is that of conflict. Every single one of us have experienced conflict, and there's different types of conflict. And I'm not a psychologist, or I don't have experience in that field, but I know that there's different experiences of conflict, like the build-up conflict, where someone in the office or someone in your team or even someone you know from a friendship perspective doesn't share things with you, things that they would like to share with you. And so it builds up, it builds up, it builds up. Eventually it explodes, and that's when you experience conflict. It either builds up because of missed expectations or miscommunication or irritation, whatever it is, but it's the build-up conflict. Another reality that probably many of us are familiar with is that of that kind of typical performance-driven boss who gets angry at lack of results. It's either a manager, it's someone in who you're reporting to, it's either someone on the board or the CEO, whoever it is, someone that is results-driven and expresses themselves in quite a harsh or angry way when things are not done well or correctly. So there's shouting, there's anger. Again, some of you may experience that form, or you might have experienced the first, as I described, the kind of build up to conflict. What about the person that you just don't understand, that type of conflict? The one where there's this passive conflict. You and that person don't see eye to eye. You know you have different views. You know there's been a little bit of water underneath the bridge. And so there isn't outright conflict in terms of anger and shouting matches, but there's a definite sense that there is division between you and that person. And there is a level of sensitivity with regards to you being around them and them being around you. Well, the last one I'll just mention is the person that doesn't think before they speak. So they stir conflict. They basically just kind of voice everything as it comes to their mind. And so they stir conflict by either hurting people's feelings or saying things a bit too bluntly or not being as sensitive as they could be. So and I mean that I've just mentioned 3 or 4 there, but there are countless scenarios of conflict. Some of it's quite harsh and extreme. Some of it's a lot more passive and subtle. But the reality is we know it. We know what conflict is. And the question is, what causes conflict? And I've got 3 P's for us today: perception, personality, and pain. Perception is misunderstandings. Actually, what causes conflict a lot of the times is someone says something and you misunderstand either their intention or their tone or the motivation behind what they were saying. And so your perception is that they're trying to hurt you or offend you or undermine you or whatever it may be. They're not actually trying to do that, but just because you don't understand them, suddenly conflict comes into the room, or it comes into your heart, or whatever it may be. The next is personality. Personality can cause conflict, and that's just the fact that we're all different. Every one of us has a different opinion. Some of us see it this way and others see it this way. Some of us feel this is the best way to grow the business and others feel this is the best way. There's multiple different personalities. That's also what we do as a business. We use Clifton Strengths, which highlights the difference in teams and individuals using a profiling assessment. But actually, a lot of conflict is rooted in the difference of personality, which comes down to difference of opinion. And then the final reason for pain for conflict is pain, which is actually malice. And malice is when you intentionally are trying to hurt someone, or you are intentionally trying to stir conflict or make someone angry or whatever it may be. And what's very interesting is that less than 20% of conflict in the workplace is caused due to number 3, pain and malice. Less than 20%, which essentially means that the majority of conflict in the workplace is actually comes down to perception and personality. The difference of a person and how they see things to you, and a difference of or possible misperception or lack of perception in terms of understanding what that person actually meant when they said it. So the first thing to just note is that actually the majority of conflict in our life is not as personal as we often think it is. Just reflect on that for a moment. The majority of conflict in your team or in your personal life or in your office, it's not as personal as you often think it is. It's not because someone is intentionally trying to make you angry or hurt you. It often comes down to a difference of opinion or a difference in perception. So let's talk about the different types of conflict. And really what we want to do today is speak about the 2 types of conflict. And really what this is a framework. If you can understand and remember this framework, it's going to empower you to deal with conflict in a way that you've never been able to deal with it before. And really the simple version of this framework is that there's 2 versions of conflict. There's destructive conflict and there is productive conflict. Destructive causes damage, obviously, and productive actually causes productivity. It causes growth. It's good. And so the first I want to just talk about conflict and trust is actually, contrary to popular belief, conflict is not always a bad thing in a team. Actually, opposite to what I just said there is that the fear of conflict is almost always a sign of a problem. So essentially, if you have a team that is always shying away from conflict in terms of saying what needs to be said or arguing potentially, whatever it may be in terms of some sort of idea or suggestion, the problem often comes down to trust. Conflict and trust are pretty much a male and a female dancing on the dance floor. They go hand in hand. It's 2 peas in a pod. You can't actually have genuine conflict without trust. And I'm going to come back to this a little bit later. But conflict is built on trust, or at least productive conflict. Destructive conflict, there's no trust needed. You kind of just say things as they are. But good conflict, productive conflict that actually leads to a positive outcome is generally built on trust. And when conflict is not being engaged with, it's generally a sign that there's trust problems. And so productive conflict is actually it's the more lengthier term is productive ideological conflict. And when I talk about productive conflict, I'm not talking about the destructive conflict, which is nasty and stirs anger and is malicious. This is more conflict that is centered around issues and decisions. So it's an impersonal type of conflict. And this is pretty much the most important slide out of today. So even if you don't remember anything else, if you can remember today's slide, it's going to help you massively as you navigate different aspects of conflict. Because productive ideological conflict is centered, like I mentioned, it's centered around things that are impersonal. So to give you some examples, if you guys in your team are talking about what's most important right now, and some of you feel like, no, we need to focus on this client, and others feel we need to focus on that client. That is an example of productive ideological conflict. When there's a heated discussion over a difference of opinion or a decision or a priority, that's productive ideological conflict. The one team is not criticizing the other team because they suck. It's not a personal it's not a personal issue. It's very much centered around a non-personal objective issue. And you could apply this to multiple examples. Often in the context of management teams, it comes down to priorities. Often in the context of lower level teams, I think of design teams, it comes down to a preference, actually. What do we prefer? Or what would be the best solution here? Or how are we going to deal with this problem? And so productive ideological conflict, when there's robust conversations, when things are heated, but it's not about a person, it's about an issue, that is not a bad thing. That is a good thing. That's what we call productive ideological conflict. And the reason we call it that is because it is productive. It leads to a positive outcome. And we're going to talk about destructive conflict in a moment, but really the opposite of productive ideological conflict is destructive conflict. The opposite of people engaging in issues in the business or the team is them not engaging in the business or the team. But again, productive conflict can only happen when there's trust, because as you'll know and you'll see in a moment, even any type of conflict, whether it's destructive or even productive conflict, it can be difficult, and there is a level of discomfort when you engage with it. So here's a very helpful kind of continuum I want to show you, which really describes what I'm talking about. So there's destructive conflict, which is kind of mean-spirited attacks. It's personal. And there are those elements in the business. And often that comes down to a person's kind of character development and their ability to control themselves, etc. But really what I'm talking about is that ideal middle point where it's not destructive. It's more on the constructive side. There is this level of honesty. People are not holding back their opinion. They're not scared to say what they think, but it's never an attack to one of their team members. It's constructive. You'll also see on the other side of the spectrum is what we call artificial harmony or farmony. Farmony is fake harmony. It's harmony that actually is caused by team members not voicing what they actually feel or actually want to say. And so everyone pretends that they're happy. Everyone pretends that they're okay with whatever's being decided. But actually behind the scenes, there's a lot of division and there's often a lot of gossip. And so this is a very helpful continuum to kind of give you an idea of where your team and even yourself, where should you fit on the spectrum of conflict? Because we're talking about whether conflict is a vice or a virtue. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And I'm sure you can resonate with what I'm saying here today. It's not bad or good. It has bad elements in the sense that it can be used to break down, and it can be used in a destructive way, but it also can be used to build up and to be used in a constructive way. It's all about how you use it. So this is what I mentioned earlier with regards to this aspect of productive ideological conflict. Ideological, it's about the idea. It's not about the person. It's that even that sort of conflict can feel uncomfortable. Even when there's trust in the team, the reality is that it's never going to be, you're never going to feel completely comfortable when you disagree with someone around a certain idea or a method or a process or a priority. It shouldn't feel completely comfortable. And we'll talk about strengths at the end in terms of which strengths would actually feel comfortable, because there are one or two. But for the majority of people, and as most of you actually mentioned, conflict generally makes you uncomfortable. And there is an element that this is going to make you uncomfortable. And so that the thing you need to realize there is that it's a healthy discomfort. And it's actually, it's a sign that there needs to be a productive conversation around, that thing or that debate or whatever it may be. So don't feel like when you're dealing with conflict, it's all going to be easygoing. Don't have the perception that it's not going to be uncomfortable. It is always going to be uncomfortable, but the reality is when it comes down to productive conflict, it doesn't have to be uncomfortable to the point of it being personal. It can just be uncomfortable because you don't want to hurt feelings. You don't want to step on people's toes, but actually it's not about that person anymore. It's about the project, the team, the business. It's objective. It's impersonal. So let's just talk about silence and conflict. So I mentioned, productive ideological conflict means that your team engage with issues. They actually voice their opinion. You actually know where they stand on certain issues. And there's a level of strong debate within your team. That's a good thing, as long as they're not taking it personally. Now, the opposite is destructive conflict. And destructive conflict can be active and passive. Active would be, the general shouting match. It would be anger. It would be breaking people down using your words. But passive destructive conflict can also actually be silence. And actually, when team members don't express their opinions, when they are silent on important issues, it actually erodes trust. It actually doesn't build trust because the team doesn't believe that everyone then is engaged in the process. And they also don't believe that everyone actually buys in. And so a very important aspect of silence is, to kind of ask yourself, if you're a team leader, or if you often share ideas, if no one ever tells you or disagrees with you in your business or your team, then you already probably know that there might be a problem when it comes to conflict and trust in your business or your team. Because the reality is, when you share an idea at your guys' table on a Monday morning, or whenever it is that you have your meeting, there needs to be a healthy level of debate. And I want to encourage you to ask yourself the question, is silence a problem in our meetings? Are our meetings too quiet? Is everyone sharing their opinion? Is everyone sharing their honest thoughts? Because that's key. If you are going to build a culture where conflict is shaped to become constructive and productive, you actually have to encourage people not to remain silent. You have to encourage even the introverts to at times share their opinions and to voice when they don't agree, and to voice their opinions on certain things and whatever that may be. And so the question here is, how engaged are your team meetings? How engaged are your team members? Is there healthy levels of kind of robust conversation and debate? Are people engaging, or is there silence? Are people just saying, yes, boss? If that's the case, you immediately know that there isn't enough trust in your team to have productive conflict. And so you need to build trust so that your team can engage. So you can see the difference between ideological conflict and destructive conflict. So I want to talk back to this thing of trust, because it's such a key aspect to conflict. And we always say with our clients that if you want to know, if you want to measure trust in the organization, you just find out how honest everyone is with each other. Because it's quite simple, really. The better you know someone, or the more you trust that person, the more honest you're going to be with them. If like my wife, I know her very well, I'll be very honest with her. If one of my colleagues in my team, if I don't know them that well, or I don't have enough trust for them, I'm not going to be as honest. I'm going to find it more difficult to give them honest feedback. And so if you want to know really how much trust do you have in your organization, you got to ask yourself, how honest are people with each other in a helpful way, not in a destructive way, but in a productive way? How honest are they with each other? So trust is key, and reluctance to engage in conflict isn't always the problem. The problem, as I mentioned, goes back to a lack of trust. That is the problem. If you want to grow a culture of productive ideological conflict, which, by the way, is the goal. It's the main, it's the culture that's going to result in higher performing teams and more engaged individuals, and employees will want to stick around longer. No one likes to work in an environment where their opinion is either never heard or they never have the confidence to voice their opinion. So there's multiple productive outcomes when you start to build this sort of culture, but it's important that you, as the leader or the employee even, make the commitment. I want to become an employee, or I want to build a team that encourages and fosters productive ideological conflict. And part of that is building trust and getting to know each other and spending time with each other. And so I want to encourage you, we as a company, OHS, we're not always fans of team building in of themselves. A lot of companies will say, for our staff development, we take our team away for 2 days a year, and we invest in them. And we generally discourage that purely for two reasons. One is finances. It's just very expensive, that approach. And secondly is impact. It's actually very low impact. It's high impact in the moment, but over a long period of time, no one is even going to remember what you guys spoke about at that team session. That's why we often will encourage small moments regularly put out throughout the year where your team can get to know each other in a more personal capacity. The more familiar they are with each other, the more honest they're going to be with each other, because naturally there's more trust. And so trust and conflict, don't forget, they go hand in hand. They two peas in a pod. They're the male and female dancing on the dance floor. You can't get back to conflict if you don't have trust. If you try, to be destructive. Okay, so what I want to do, I've kind of concluded some of the input. I just want to do another poll. So I'm going to ask you to pull your phones out again or go into the chat and click the link again. And I'm going to ask you a question around, now that we've concluded some of this conversation around productive ideological conflict, I want to find, how do you respond to this sort of difference of view? Remember, I said when we started, this is a framework. It's all about a framework. It's a frame to process conflict. It's a framework to help you understand how conflict works and how it could work in a positive light. The question is, how do you respond to productive ideological conflict? How do you respond to productive? So this is, how do you respond when you are having a robust conversation over an issue in the business, idea, priority, that sort of thing? Okay, so this is great. So this is very different from the result we saw earlier, where most of you were saying that you fear conflict and you prefer not to engage with conflict and avoid conflict. Whereas this is, you're saying, if you basically, what I'm seeing here is if conflict is done well, if conflict is done in a productive means, in a means that isn't personal, in a way, even verbally, that isn't destructive or offensive, it actually can motivate. And that's brilliant. And you need to remember that, because even though, you know, it might be one or two of your team members here, or maybe the team leaders here, whoever it is that's here, you need to realize that this applies to everyone in your team. Your leader, it applies to you, it applies to those above you, it applies to those below you. Anyone who is engaged with healthy, productive ideological conflict will likely feel motivated. That's just the reality. Yes, there will be a level of discomfort, as I mentioned, but the reality is it's going to motivate. So let me not jump the gun. We've got another question, but let's go to the next question. Okay, how often do you experience productive ideological conflict in your workplace? How often do you experience the good type of conflict? Okay, hardly ever, often. Okay. Okay, cool. All right, so basically 2/3 of you are saying often, which is brilliant. And this often comes down to the team leader. It often comes down to the team leader's ability to lead conflict and shift conflict towards the healthier version. But sometimes there is someone on the team that just is very difficult to lead. And sometimes there is someone on the team that stirs conflict. So about 1/3 of you are saying you hardly ever experience the productive type of conflict in your workplace. And I really want to encourage all of you that are here today, take this back to your team. Whether you're the leader, whether you're the team member, whether you're low on the organogram, whether you're high on the organogram, this concept of destructive conflict or productive ideological conflict is key, because when you can understand the difference, you can realize that most conflict is not as personal as you originally thought. Most conflict is not as personal as you originally thought. It's not supposed to offend you like you thought it was. And so I want to encourage you, take this back to your team. All right, let's go to the next question. All right, so this is your leadership, and it doesn't mean you're in a leadership position, but how do you rate your ability to shift a conflict scenario toward productive ideological conflict? So you can see conflict is starting to kind of stir in a team or within two team members. How do you rate your ability to take that moment or that conversation? And maybe I must just say, 3 would be brilliant, 1 would be terrible. So 1 is you're not good at it at all, and 3 was I'm pretty good at it. I feel quite confident that I can move conflict along in terms of helping people to see that it's not personal and that it's more about the idea or about the actual concept than it is about the person. Okay, great. All right, so 1/3 of you are saying it's too difficult, or at the moment you don't feel like you're very good at it. About half of you are saying that actually you're not bad, could be better, but not bad. And then about another, just under 1/3 of you are saying that you're good at it, which is fine. So I think that's something that if you kind of marked number 1 or number 2 as your rating, I would encourage you to, now that you are aware of this framework, I would encourage you the next time you see conflict brewing to move towards it and to learn how to do that. You don't have to be the team leader to shape your culture. You don't have to be the team leader to influence people. If you've got an ability to take conflict and to shape it and to turn it around for it to become productive and impersonal so that it doesn't hurt your team members, I want to encourage you to do that. Whether, like I mentioned, doesn't matter what position you're in. Okay, so I want to just jump back quickly to back to our presentation here. Okay, so many of you would know that OHS, we're involved with many different companies and industries, whether it's schools, nonprofits, finance, many different sectors, hospitality. You can go on the website and see our different clients. But what that essentially means is that we use strengths with all these different clients. And strengths is a profile and assessment. And pretty much one month we'll do a input related session around just general leadership principles like we're doing today. And then the other month we're going to do a strengths related input. So like next month in August, we're going to do a strengths related input session that's actually focused on strengths. You don't have to have done your strengths to engage with it, but it's just a helpful way for you to start using strengths in the context of team and culture. But I want to kind of come to an end before we go to Q&A. Is I want to just talk about conflict and strengths, just so that you guys know. So some of you may have done your strengths assessment, so you'd understand this language. Some of you might not have. So I'll just explain it. But how do different strengths respond to conflict? And just conflict in general, not destructive or productive. Just how do the strengths respond and process conflict? So the first one I want to mention is harmony. So harmony is a strength that desires unity and desires everyone working together. They love it when the team is happy and the team loves each other. It's quite an emotional strength in that it's driven by emotions. So they pursue peace, even if it's harmony. So how do they process conflict? Often they won't engage with conflict. Often they will create harmony, which is fake harmony. So instead of saying what needs to be said in the team or the business, or instead of giving feedback to their team leader, they just rather won't, because they feel like that will destroy the peace in the team. So harmony will respond by possibly, I'm not saying this always happens, but often they create harmony, fake harmony. Empathy, very sensitive to all conflict. Empathy, this is the strength that feels people's emotions very deeply. So with these people, if there's someone in your team that enjoys having robust conversations, so remember I said productive ideological conflict is also going to feel uncomfortable at times. For a person with empathy, it's going to feel the most uncomfortable. They are going to be the one in the room, even when it's productive, even when it's positive, they are genuinely going to struggle with that sort of conflict. Positivity is next. Positivity, these people are positive and glass half full. They're quite loud and energetic. They want to be liked. And they also, as a result, often gravitate towards harmony. Why? Because they don't want to say things that might make people not like them anymore, basically. And so they often can gravitate towards harmony, fake harmony. And so they won't tell someone when that person's done something wrong, or they won't always say what needs to be said in terms of giving that team member feedback, or coming down on someone if they haven't met a deadline or whatever it is, whether it's positive or negative. They're not going to engage it because they don't necessarily want to not be liked. Communication is verbal processes. So they speak everything they think. This also can create conflict. So these people might be prone to stir conflict. Likewise with command. And I'm just going to sit on command a little bit. Command is the one strength that actually intentionally enjoys conflict. They genuinely stir conflict. They enjoy disagreement. Devil's advocate, that's them. And what's very interesting about command is they are very impersonal when it comes to conflict. So you could sit with them across the table, have a full-on shouting match about an idea or even about a personal issue, And then they'll come to your office a little bit late and ask you if you want to go for lunch because there's a special downstairs at the fruit and veg. It's just so confusing. And obviously, if you've got other strengths with your command, it might cut off aspects of that. But I know many, many people with command that can have a full-on fight with someone and then still have lunch with that person as if nothing happened. And for them, genuinely, it wasn't personal. It was just an issue, dealing with it and moving on. So these people have got to be really, really careful. Because if they're not careful, they can actually break down trust because they come across as destructive conflict. They come across as quite offensive and personal when they stir conflict. Self-assurance is next. They speak before they think often because they have so much confidence. And so that also can cause some conflict. Relator, these people are very authentic and honest. So with these people, they can process conflict quite well. So statistically, those of you that answered that question around, are you able to shift a conflict situation toward productive conflict? The likelihood of each of you having relator is quite high. These people are very authentic. They're very honest. They're able to sift through the emotions and kind of get to the heart of the matter. So relator, you kind of know where you stand with them. And they're able to also say quite difficult things in a soft, loving way, in a way that gets people to respond positively as opposed to getting people on the defensive. Strategic is next. And last, strategic, these are the fast thinkers and the fast decision makers. They do things quickly. And so sometimes if they're moving fast in their kind of role, they may not be as sensitive to the people around them. So they might offend people and they might even stir conflict because they're quite quick in their thinking and their decision making. And so they could also be people that potentially might stir conflict. So that's how some of the strengths respond and process conflict. We haven't touched on them all. We've kind of touched on some of the main ones. But I want to encourage you, if you want to talk more about your strengths and how do you deal with conflict, please reach out to us. We'd love to chat to you and do a session with you. But otherwise, what I'd like to do now actually is just open the floor for Q&A. So I'm going to stop screen sharing for the remainder of our session. And I'm just going to ask you guys, if you don't mind, maybe turning your camera on just so that I can see your face. And I'll just open it up to you. Are there any questions when it comes to conflict, whether it's destructive or ideological, or any questions around the concepts that I've described here, particularly today around conflict and team? Feel free. Any questions? No question is off limits. Maybe it's something I can jump back to a slide. Maybe it's something that was kind of rattling around in your mind that you thought, oh, I wonder what happens in this situation or this scenario. And maybe while you think, I'll say one last thing. Really what today is what we were trying to achieve today is we tried to provide a framework for each of you, a framework to help you process conflict, a framework that when there is conflict, because there will be, a framework to help you and make sense of that and then shift that into a productive form of conflict. And that does take time and it does take skill, but if you've got that framework, it's substantially easier to make that shift. If you don't have that framework, like all of you answered in the beginning, most conflict is going to feel personal and most conflict is not going to result in a productive outcome. Yes. Is there a hand up?
There is. It's not a question, it's a statement more than anything else. And I'm delighted to hear you giving the two definition or two examples of a destructive conflict versus productive conflict. Because I think conflict in itself is a very negative word. And I don't think many people actually think that conflict can have a positive connotation to it. Yeah. So I was delighted on your thing on productive conflict. So I think that's very, very important.
Yeah, that's good. And I think the other key aspect there is also a positive word is ideological, because it's not personal. Productive, so it's positive. Ideological, it's not about you, it's about the issue. Conflict, it can be uncomfortable. We're talking about an issue in a potentially a slightly uncomfortable way, but it's not about you, so you don't have to necessarily take it personally. That's other thoughts or questions from your guys' side?
Caleb, I think just to say, as somebody who has got positivity and empathy, it's very difficult not to take it personally. Just as a comment, because you think, oh my gosh, it's about me. What have I done wrong? Can't sleep tonight. So it's very difficult. Yeah.
Sam, can I ask you a question on that? While we've got time, what would someone have to do to help you believe that it's not personal? So if they were having quite a robust conversation with you, what would they have to actually do or say to make you genuinely believe that it's not personal?
I don't think it's as much as saying something to me as your body language. So, if you were, for example, holding me on the arm, or just putting your hand across mine, or engaging me eye to eye, then I think that makes me feel more comfortable that it's not a case of, Sam, it's not you I'm talking to. But it's not so much what you say, it's how you act it out.
Oh, yes.
That makes sense?
Sure. Yeah, very good. Yeah, that's good. Any other questions or comments? Cool. So guys, I want to just thank you for attending today. Just to clarify, these sessions are once a month. They're there to equip you and to hopefully give you frameworks as you lead and as you form part of a team, frameworks to build healthy cultures and essentially create work environments where hopefully your employees love to give their best and where you love to give your best if you are an employee. And yeah, just to say that you're always welcome to pass the invite on to whoever else you'd like to. These sessions are not closed by any means. We pretty much do them often primarily for the employee, because the employees are often dealing with challenges that they don't have or aren't equipped often to deal with. And so we're trying to help them lead from within and change the culture from within their business, as opposed to us always coming in. And so essentially we're hopefully replicating part of what we do in them or in you. So it's always open, and we'll land it there. Have a great day. Have a great week. It's Wednesday. It's a beautiful day in Cape Town. I don't know where, hopefully all of you are in Cape Town, but enjoy the last hour of work. And if you finish work, enjoy the rest of your evening. Cheers, everyone. I'm going to end the meeting.